Okay. I think this is correct. Alright. I'll tell people that we're streaming. Streaming India Dev. Making sunlight. Exciting. Alright, so that should be all fine. Alright, so what we're going to do today is make some sunlight. I got some problems with the transparency shaders in the Unity setup I'm using. They don't get along very well with the fog I'm using. So we've got a lot of options, but rather than try and make another transparent shader, I think we're going to try doing some dither shaders just to see whether or not we can get a cool feel out of it, because I know that the dither shaders are reliable and work well and don't have any dependencies. And if it turns out that they don't work for this particular visual, we can always find something else. So to use a dither shader, all we really need to do is add in a dither command like that and drop it into the opacity mask and then drop alpha into this. So the issue with the dither shaders is that they're opaque, so you get this kind of crawling when you see them, but that's kind of what we want. So we're going to see whether or not we can convince that crawl to work for us instead. Ooh, excuse me. To work for us instead of against us. So you can see right there, these pillars are the sunbeams that we were trying to make. And you can see, I don't know how much you can see on Twitch or YouTube, wherever you're seeing this, but they're really, really obviously a dither pattern. The pixels don't move, even when the pillar moves. So it looks like there's like a slice of paper or something that's just getting moved on the, like a texture that we don't really want. The good news is that they are opaque, which means that they only have a couple of bugs instead of a lot of bugs. What we're going to do is we're going to make this dither not work in this way. We're going to try and set it up so that the dither pattern, the opacity changes to how we need it to change. One of the issues we've got here is that there are actually 3 concentric rings here. This is a particle shader, and there are 3 concentric rings, and because the dither shader is set up the way it is, and they all have the same settings, you can't tell, because they're all dithering on the same pixels. So what we're going to want to do is, we can't use particles for this. The reason for that is pretty simple. Particles don't work. They don't have any sense of where they are in the game world. You can't get vector or vertex positions or local or world positions. You can't get anything out of them. So that's why we're going to switch over from using a pixel area particle setup to just using actual beams. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and turn off most of these and just leave one of them on. That one there. It's pretty close to the entrance. It should be fine. You can see how the way that I've got it set up, there is a particle system and then another particle system. Yeah, so there's 2 particle systems, an outer and an inner. And then there's a light. We're going to rename the light. And then we'll go ahead and just check and see what mesh we're using. Tube. All right. So we're going to hide these. We don't need them. We'll delete them once we have a good replacement. We're going to create a new, I don't know, cylinder, and we'll rename it tube. There we have it. Boom, there's our tube. And of course, we do not want any colliders because it's light. It goes almost without saying that you shouldn't be able to collide with light. So obviously the exact setup here is a little bit wrong, but before we change the exact layout of this, let's go ahead and drop in the sunbeam particle that we're using. It's not even a particle anymore. It's now going to be a sunbeam. We'll just call it sunbeam. All right, so now if we were to start to move this around and put it into place, we could sort of manufacture a nice little setup with it. And that means that it needs to be quite long and a little bit bigger. Oh, it needs to be much, much longer. like this. So this now has, oh, it's quite tall. Let's bring it down quite a bit there. This is actually opaque, this water here, although it does have some problems. I need to do it again because I think that I got some of the settings incorrect. But one of the issues we've got with this sunbeam is that it is like super straight. So we might have to figure out exactly what we want to do with that. There's a lot of possibilities about how we want it to look. But first, let's just go ahead and hit play and take a look at it. Now, the reason that we're switching over to using a mesh is because a mesh has a world position. So what we can do is we can make it have noise that kind of wanders along in the world and gives it kind of like a wavy effect. And I think that's going to be pretty nice. We got some issues with this in that there's no concentration of light on the edges. It's really pretty weak, but you know, we can fix all that. Let's go ahead and get started. So basically this dither is not going to be connected to the sunbeam's color. Instead, we're going to connect it up to a noise system. So if we look at the noise generator, boom, we can switch it over into a simplex 3D noise. And then we can pass in the world position. There it is. Here. Now, there's a lot of other things we can do, but it's worth just taking a look at this. Now, this will give us a very spotty appearance because it runs from -1 to 1, and dither will give us nothing below 0. So this should give us like a cloudy look with just like spots of clouds. Yeah, see? I'm not sure why the camera... I guess I'll move the character because it looks like the camera is stuck inside a rock when we start. So you can see that what we've got here is a very cloudy look. And what we're going to do is we're going to just adjust this until it fits our needs. And there's a lot of fun ways to do it that. A lot of fun things to do with that. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to radically change it so there's a lot less between 0 and 1. We're going to force it to be much closer to 1 or much closer to 0. Which isn't really that hard. It's just something we got to do. There is still, however, some strangeness going on. Like, why is the character gold now? Why is the backdrop gold? This is opaque. This is an opaque shader. Why is it screwing up the fog effect again? It's not even... What's going on? It shouldn't have this effect. Let's go ahead and just see if I can figure out what the heck is going on, because maybe I don't have to switch it out if I can figure out why it's not working. You see, this is not how it should look, obviously. It should have, like, some particles in front, and then it shouldn't change the color of the rock in the places where the particles aren't. This is so strange. Well, let's start by moving the player. So, we've got an opaque shader. Unlit. Render path all. Vertex output relative. Cull mode. We can change this from that to off. But why is it... I'm trying to figure out why it's creating that weird glow effect. Even when I turn off the light, everything behind it is like bizarrely bright. So if we were to move over to the side, you're going to see that rock is going to start to glow yellow. Why? It must be screwing up the depth writing. That's all I can think of. But that doesn't make any sense because it's not it's not there. The ones that are invisible should be completely invisible. There's no opacity. It's completely opaque. If we remove the dither, do you think that'll fix it? Let's try it. Oh, you know what it probably is? It's probably that the emission... Let's try it. I bet the emission is counting as emissive even when it's transparent. That's my guess. Although, that's not actually going to fix it because emission being multiplied by 0.5 is quite a lot, but it still counts as an invisible pixel. Alright, so this is what it looks like without the dither, and you can see that the rock isn't glowing. So let's put the dither back in. Now let's try a couple of things. So first we're going to try not multiplying by the noise generator. It might be that the dither ratchets between 0 and 1, so we can do it there. Yeah, so you can see that that was what was causing it to be fixed. So it's got nothing to do with the dither and everything to do with it counting as emissive. Okay, we might be able to do it with transparency then. Let's see if we can turn the transparency back on and see if we can get it to feel right. So in order for that to happen, what we're going to do is we're going to pop that. That's not the dither, that's the divide. So this dither here will give you a value between of either 0 or 1, which means that if we multiply the emission like this, there shouldn't be any issue with it, right? And if we change it from opacity mask to opacity, actually we shouldn't even need to do that, right? Let's see what happens. I mean, there are worse experiments to run. Oh, but the render queue is on alpha test. It needs to be on transparent. Let me just change that real quick. All right, so you can see that it's working in render mode now, but it's impossible for me to tell if it's erroring because the fog doesn't appear in render mode in scene view. It only appears in game view. Yeah, so you can see that there's an error. Some of the points work and some of them don't. The transparency is screwing up based on the Z buffer. So that's why we can't really use transparency. It's possible that we might be able to do it with some other thing like an overlay. I know that I tried this before to get the overlay to work, and it worked even worse. So we may have to do it with an opaque dither setup like we did, but just modifying the emissions. Yeah, we're going to have to do it that way. No biggie. So let's go ahead and set this back to being opaque on the alpha test layer like that. And then the dither, this should now be completely fine in terms of not making things behind it go berserk. Yeah, so this is the right kind of thing, but the problem is that I have to rely very heavily on an opaque dither. Now let's see what we can do with it. So we're going to have to adjust the world position here because we're going to have a lot of values that need to be different than they currently are. So first off, let's change the noise scale. We'll have it with a min of 0 and a max of, I don't know, 3. I'm not actually sure if it's higher or lower that we want. We'll just go ahead and make it a property so we can go in either direction. Just save that. It looks like higher is bad, so we'll probably want to go lower. Yeah. So something like 0.24 is probably best. So we'll just go ahead and set that up in here. Now we're also going to need to move it over time. So for that, we're going to need a vector 3, which we'll call the drift. We'll make it a property. And we're going to make it drift downwards and a little bit on another axis. We're going to multiply that by time. No, not time parameters, just time. There it is. And we're going to add that. There we are. That'll make it drift over time. The last thing we're going to want to do is we actually want to make this world position a little bit fancier. So what we're going to do is we are going to crush it down on the y-axis. So to do that, we are going to append. No, that's add. V? Append, there it is. V for append, obviously. It's going to be X and Z. And then we're going to change the Y to be multiplied by an arbitrary value. There we go. All right, so let's go ahead and see it, and then we can adjust all of the values as we need to. Oh, you know what? Yeah, that should be fine. Y squash is for some reason 0.27. I think I meant to make it 2.7. So I gave Y squash some weird parameters. I think I got it backwards in my head. So that's what it looks like at 2. And that's what it looks like when we make it higher, like this. And we can adjust this to be a little bit more interesting pretty easily. So this will produce a steady kind of a vortex look to our lights, which doesn't look quite like I want it to look just yet, but we're kind of getting there. There are some things I don't really know if they'll work, but we have to introduce a remap regardless. What I might do is introduce a normal, a world normal versus camera normal. But first, let's start with the remap. So here's our noise generator. Let's move this kabloom off here. Now we're going to put in a remap, which is just going to be taking it from whatever it was to whatever we want it to be. And I believe this is between -1 and 1. And we want it to be between, let's say, -1 and 0.3. Now, the reason for that is because it should give us quite a bit of a cloudy look, which should look a little bit more like how I want this to be, because we're going to make it layered. Yeah, that's a little bit more like what I want it to be. There are some other factors involved here. One of the things that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to adjust how dense the light is based on the distance down the pole. And to do that, we're not going to be using any world coordinates. We're going to be using a UV map. Because if we take a look at the beam here, this tube is in our FX. Pop that up. Tube, there it is. This is a really old file. Why? Stop being in whatever the fuck. Here. So this is what it looks like, and this is how it's laid out, as you can see. And the points are at the top and the bottom, meaning they're on the y-axis. So we're just going to use the y-axis to determine how far down the pole we are. So for that, we're going to go ahead and just alter this remapped value to be based on how far down on the y-axis or up on the y-axis we are. So if we were just to take the v coordinate here and drop that into max new, that ought to give us most of what we need. I don't think we have to specify anything here. I think it'll just work. Now the only question is whether or not I have this upside down. Nope, that's correct. So you can see that up at the top we got quite a dense setup, and down at the bottom we got a much weaker setup. And if we were to pull this all up, you can see that as we shrink the pole, we no longer have to worry about the tip not making sense, because the tip will now be completely transparent. It's going between -1 and 0, and 0 is going to be fully transparent, so we don't have to worry about that. See? Easy little trick. I don't like the way it moves. There's actually a lot I don't like about it. Let's go ahead and square these values. What I really wanted to do is kind of radiate rather than just cycle down. I want it to morph and pulse. And instead what I'm getting is... Oh, so squaring it doesn't work. I have to multiply it by the absolute value of itself, which is a slightly different setup, so... So all that does is it squares it, but it preserves the negative sign. So we won't get a strange sandwich of it getting brighter again at the bottom. Maybe I should use a step instead of a squaring. Let's try it. I wonder what step anti-aliasing is. But provides an anti-aliased edge. Oh, that's fascinating. Is this a function? It is. Huh. I'm not sure how this works. Let's go ahead and take a look at the online reference. Hello, online. Fuck you. Thank you. So, step node implements a step function which returns a 1 if b is greater than or equal to the value or a corresponding vector of a. Otherwise, it returns 0. So if b is big, it's 1, and otherwise it's 0. That's not quite what I want. I want to... well, I mean, we could use a step anti-alias and just see how it looks. So if b is high, then we get what we want. So we're going to try it like this. The thing is, that's going to replace the dither. The dither is going to be like an anti-aliased edge now. We're going to see if that works at all. It's ooh. The anti-aliased edge is not worth much. So being bigger than 0 is not really what we want. I'll make it bigger than 0.5. That should be a little bit more in tune with what we need. Yeah, so here you can see what it looks like. This is what happens when you don't dither, and you just use a flat opaque check. Quite frankly, this is exactly like if we weren't doing anything at all, because that's 0.5 is the actual default anyway. I'm not sure why they're flickering. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, the dither is what I want is tight stripes. So you can see that these are very, very close together. And the problem is that I don't actually want them to exist. I want them to be like sparse. I'm just adjusting things on the other side to see what I can get. Okay. That might be pretty close to what I want. Now the problem with this is that they move down and they seem very stable. What we actually want them to do is the opposite of that. So we're going to not move them down at all. We're going to move them on a random axis that doesn't line up. That way they will drift across on one of the axes, but hopefully it won't be an axis that we care about. Yeah, so now we can get this kind of drifting cycling thing going. That's a little bit more like what I want out of my sunbeam. That's not too shabby. We do have a problem in that our sunbeam is currently going to be very tightly related to any other sunbeams. So this is another sunbeam. If we were to scale it up like this, and then duplicate it and scale it up again like this, each of these duplicate sunbeams is going to be quite close to its interior beams in terms of what it's showing. That'll give us a strange effect, I think. Yeah, so you can see how that's kind of like moving in triplicate. It looks very, very fakey. What we need to do is have each of these have a different set of values for what they should be showing. So what we're going to do is down here on the time and the drift and the add, we're actually going to add the object position here. Or we could add the, yeah, object. Can I get the object position? Object scale. I can get the object scale. That's just as good. So if we take this object scale and we multiply it by some arbitrarily large amount. Oh, that didn't work. Try that again. Since the various ones are going to be scaled differently, it should allow us to get different different values, and so they won't look quite as cloned. Yeah, that's a little bit better. I'm not sure. I have a very limited set of options, and it's a challenge to try and figure out exactly how this should look. But let's go ahead and do some tweaking here. The noise scale is probably about right. So right now I'm doing this rescale here at 0.3. I bet if I take it down to maybe 0.1, it'll give me more waves and a thicker result. I just don't know. It's such a strange visual. I think it's not what I want. Let's go ahead and look up underwater sunbeams. I mean, the problem is that they're transparent. That's the whole point. And this is not. So most sunbeams actually go the opposite direction. Let's go ahead and try that. That's not quite right, is it? If we change the noise scale... One of the issues is that our tube is very tubey. It's not really well suited for our needs. So we got an FX new down here. Let's go ahead and pop that up. And we're going to just create a different tube, one that is like a trumpet. So just move that out of the way and create a cylinder. Cylinder. We don't need these top and bottom faces. Just delete them. Nope, faces. And then this, you can see that we have something that almost works. We're just going to go ahead and move it down to the bottom. And now it's set up correctly. And all we need to do is expand the bottom by however much we want in order to get the trumpet-like shape that we would like. There we are. I think that's probably about right. Let's go ahead and call this funnel. So let's switch out these cylinders for funnels. Can't spell funnel without fun. And let's rotate them so they're correct. That can't be right. I guess it is. I have a feeling that's wrong and it's going to bite me in the ass later, but we'll go ahead and try it, see what sort of stuff we can get out of it. The funnel shape should give it a little bit more of a natural feel instead of feeling super, super straight. So we have a couple of issues with this, but I'm not sure... I just don't know. I'm not really sold on it. Let's go ahead and get rid of the y-axis nonsense here. Spend the whole time just dicking around with these sunbeams to try and make them look good. Opaque sunbeams. You're not supposed to have opaque sunbeams. It's such a stupid idea. I just can't get them to work with transparency, and as long as I'm using the setup I've got for the rest of this. Alright, so we got a couple of options now. One of the options is, let's go ahead and take a dot product with the camera direction and the normal. So if we get the normal, and we get the camera direction, or is it called the view direction? Yeah, view direction. There it is. So this is world space, and this is object space. We got a world normal. World normal, there it is. So we can go ahead and do a dot product here. Try and go in the correct spaces here. If it's 1, then it means that that the two are perfectly aligned. If it's -1, it means that they are perfectly unaligned. Both of those cases are good, so let's go ahead and do an absolute value. And then we'll just put that in where we used to use our texture coordinate. I actually can't tell if that did anything. I think it actually looks better, but It's strange that I can't tell. I'm not sure it's actually working. Let's go ahead and do a 1 minus on that just so that we know whether or not it's working, because a 1 minus should be really obvious. Yeah, it's working. So the question is whether or not I want it to be edge heavy or whether I want it to be center heavy. And the answer is I want it to be center heavy. Or do I? That actually might be much, much better. Yeah. Yeah. This is not a bad idea. I obviously have to tweak it a little bit more. But this actually looks properly like shafts of sunlight. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to radically shrink all of these down like this, and then we'll expand them a little bit on the z-axis like this. Oh, I could also just offset them through each other. That would make sense too. All right, so let's go ahead and delete 2 of these. This is the one that survived our deleting. Let's go ahead and scale it up a little bit. You can see that the trumpet is not trumpety enough, so we're going to go ahead and expand it. There we are. We'll move this down a little bit more. And then what we can do is we can duplicate it and then maybe just move it around. No, that's scaling. Now, because they're all scaled the same, they're going to have world coordinates that match up really, really tightly. But that should be okay in this case. Yeah, it seems actually not too bad, does it? That part's really fakey. I'm trying to figure out how I want to make this look good, and one of the issues I've got is that when they're cones like this and they overlap, you sometimes get that. You see that? Which really feels fake. I think I'm going to try nesting them. And we'll delete 2 of these guys. Now, the only problem is that when they're attached like this, they might be too obviously connected. Actually, that doesn't seem... It's pretty fakey. It's not awful, but you really get a sense of that being like 3 predefined lines, and that's kind of what I want to avoid. Why don't I just do vertex offsets? All right, so let's try some vertex offsets. So in order to do vertex offsets, we are going to be using this command here, local vertex offset, and we're just going to be using some noise. So let's bring that noise back in. We actually have the noise over here, but we don't want the noise to be the same. The whole point is we would like it to be different. Let's go ahead and set this off as its own value. Save it for use in other places. So what is it, register? There it is. And we can register this as noise or adjusted position. And then we can fetch it here. No, get. So that's going to be get that adjusted position. Drop it in here. So with that in mind, what we can do is we can copy this and paste it down here. We're not going to be using that noise scale. We're going to be going and deleting that noise scale. And we can use whatever scale we want. I think 1 is far too high. Let's try 0.1. Maybe 0.3. And we'll just drop that into local vertex offset after we multiply it We have to multiply it by the normal. So, normal. Now that's local versus world. That would be interesting. Offsetting a local. I don't think I want to. I want to use local normal. The only problem is that these clusters of pieces are very tightly related to each other. And so when they move, they'll probably all move in concert. That's not actually too shabby, is it? It's a little strange. One of those seems to be inverting. Oh, it's between -1 and 1. So we're going to have to do a remap. That's no big deal. Just a remap. So it's actually moving along the normal, but sometimes it's moving along the normal in a negative direction, which is obviously a little silly. So we're just going to remap that from -1 to 1 to 0 to 1. That way we won't get it overlapping itself. Because the way that sunlight works, it's never going to funnel together. That doesn't make any sense, and it feels stupid. So we're not going to let that happen. Now, as to whether or not I think this is good, I don't know. It's certainly better than what we had. But, I mean, that triple hit is really pretty obvious. I don't... What would happen if I were to aim at a dot product of 0.5 rather than 0, rather than 1? So right now, when we take the dot product here, here it is. We get the absolute value, and then we invert it. What we're actually wanting to do here is we want to take it from 0.5. So the closer it is to 0.5, the better off we are. So if we were to absolute value it, and then it's between 0 and 1, and we were to subtract 0.5, it would be between -0.5 and 0.5. Then we multiply by 2 and do an absolute value. Yeah, I guess that's what we're going to have to do. It's a little convoluted to do it that way, but whatever. So we'll aim for 0.5 here. Subtract. I guess I could do a remap, but whatever. So if we subtract 0.5, then we'll end up between -0.5 and 0.5, and we can multiply by 2. I guess I could probably do a remap. Yeah, let's just do a remap. So it's between 0 and 1 right now. We want to make it between -1 and 1. And then we're going to do an absolute value again. And then we're going to do a 1 minus. And that should give us values where it is kind of pointed at or away from the camera instead of only the edge. Because the edge was a little bit too obvious, and I'm trying to make it a little bit less obvious here. Oh, yeah, that's a little bit better. Yeah, that's much better. All right, good, good, good. So we still do have a couple of problems with this setup, but this is so much better than it was before, and I think everybody can agree on that. It's also cheaper. That sunlight, that dappled sunlight, is kind of bolting across the screen. Let's go ahead and reduce that speed quite a bit. I think that we don't want it to be quite that fast. I don't think we need to have drift be a vector 4, though. I'll just reduce that down to a vector 3 in a second here. All right. So don't need this. We could use it. I mean, I could multiply the texture coordinates by this, and that would give us a top-heavy set of beams Let's go ahead and try it, see if it works. Oh, just B. There we are. Now the drift here should be a vector 3. It is a vector 3. I don't know why it's letting me put in a W on the inspector then. Whatever. So in theory, this should now either be top heavy or bottom heavy, and I can go ahead and just invert it if it's bottom heavy. Oh, it's top heavy. The effect is really aggressive, though. Don't need this anymore. Close that down. All we really need to do is remap it. Yay for the remap! Here's our texture coordinate set up. Let's go ahead and put this here, and then here we'll pull this into a remap. Nope, just V. And it was between 0 and 1. We're going to want to make it between 0.5 and 1. And then we'll punch that into the multiply. And that'll make it a fall off, but it won't make it so severe that it's only on the very, very top, right? We have a lot of other options to punch this up and make it a little bit more aggressive. It's not terrible, but it is very separated. It doesn't feel like it should be producing that spotlight on the rock. Let's go ahead and do some more tweaking. So basically, what I was doing here is I took the absolute value of the view direction in the world normal, and if I don't 1 minus it, we get the view direction towards us, whereas if I 1 minus it, we get the view direction on the edges. And this nonsense here gets us the view direction kind of in the middle, as you can see by this circle. The black part is the part that we can actually see, because there's then 1 minus. So. But we do need the middle. So I guess what we're going to do is we're not going to 1 minus it. And instead we're going to just use this remap straight. And the remap here goes from 0 to 1 to -1 to 1. And what we're actually going to want to do here is do the opposite. I'm going to make it go from 0 to 2. And that should make the center really, really stupid. Like, just flat opaque. Let's find out. Yeah, so you can see that the center is... I don't know whether I like this or not. Because we're not backface culling, we are getting some strange depth artifacting. Let's go ahead and backface cull, now that we've got more surfaces. Of course, backface culling means that we'll never get that view direction away from the camera, and there's no reason to absolute value anything. But let's just take a look here. So without the backface culling, you can see it's way sparser. Shouldn't be this sparse. I mean, I guess maybe I should just replace it with some very, very basic particle texture quads. This is annoying. It's only annoying because I don't know something. It's like if I knew how to do transparency better, then it would be much more bearable. But unfortunately, I don't. I'm kind of a dummy. I know that it's one of those things where a lot of games have a really big time, really hard time with transparency. So it's not like I'm surprised that I'm having a hard time with it. I think it's one of those things that didn't really work well in the old version of Unity and probably still doesn't work very well. And I actually switched to the high def pipeline for a while to try and get rendering to work better on transparency, but high def pipeline has some other constraints that are no good. So we can always adjust it later. Let's go ahead and say that this is better than what we had because what we had just flat out didn't work. However, it's the wrong size. You can see how the light isn't lining up with it very well, and that's just because the light is so much bigger than it is. But the sunbeam is actually very large, so my guess is that the light is just too wide. So what we're going to do is we're going to find this light, and we're just going to rein it in like this. That should keep it from being too aggressive. We'll go ahead and delete these sunbeams here. Okay, well, it's one of those things where the new prefab system is biting me in the ass, so we're going to apply the changes, and then we're going to open it up as its own thing. Yeah, fuck you. There we are. And delete these things. And we're not allowed to delete them in the actual game environment, even though it's exactly the same process. Then we'll leave this. Go back out here. These should all have been updated. We can turn them all back on. And let's take a look. Yeah, that's much better. Now you can see that this one is yellow and that one is blue. That is 100% because of the fog color grading. And I kind of like it like that. I kind of like the idea that they change color as you get closer. But I'm open to suggestions. It's not something I'm really good at or smart about. I think that yellow is a little too yellow, but the basic idea is something I like. So let's go ahead and take that yellow from... Oh, the yellow isn't even a valid color. Let's set that yellow up as a color that we can edit. For some reason, I set it up as a constant. There we are. So if we bring that yellow down a little bit and make it just a little bit less yellow and a lot more gray, I think it'll feel a little bit more natural. Well, we got some hitching. You can see that hitching. So the emissiveness I'm using is pretty low, to the point where it looks like I'm getting some black injection. And that might just be because this is set so low. Yes, it was. So when I pump that up, I'm not in any danger of getting a black pixel. There are some strangenesses here where we get these vertical lines. See those kind of like scan lines? Those are weird, but they're actually part of the mesh, not like something on the screen due to the dithering process. Really strange. I don't know if I'm scaling Y by enough yet. The Y squash seems still a little bit... Why is the Y squash not really squashing very much? Is there something wrong with this? No, it's just really long. Yeah, don't really dislike this. What I'm doing right now, though, is I'm radically boosting the opacity on the face directly facing us, which is producing these nearly opaque shafts of light, which isn't necessarily bad, but I'm not sure that that's actually a good use of the way I'm setting things up. One of the other issues we've got is that right now we're using this triple ply trumpet, and we probably don't need to. So we're going to go ahead and reopen the file, change it from triple ply to single ply, and see whether or not it still feels okay. Because I think a lot of the noise we're getting in terms of like vertical stripes and banding is because it's triple ply. And the only reason it was triple ply was because I used to use the edges a lot more. Well, that certainly didn't reduce the banding. Oh, you know what? I forgot that I was moving the vertex. See, I've got that vertex offset operator, but I only had verts at the top and at the bottom, which meant that it was only like sweeping it in and out in a particular way. When I do it like this, I should get some bumping. I actually can't tell. Well, I mean, for now, I guess that's fine. I shouldn't have spent a whole hour trying to do this, but it was really bothering me. And you can see just how bad the transparency system is. This transparent arrow that we've got is really screwing up all of the effects on that rock. See? That's because the transparency, we can only really have one transparency effect, and it should be the fog. Everything else needs to be opaque, except in very, very specific circumstances. As long as there's something opaque behind the transparent thing, like we can use it for glass if there is an opaque room directly behind the glass. But as long as there is like fog involved, it's gonna frig up the fog, and that's kind of not great, you know? I'll have to think about that. I know that one of the big advantages to certain games is that they were made in an engine that can do transparency, like Unreal. And it's just a shame. I don't know whether Unity couldn't really do it at all with this particular pipeline, or whether or not I just don't understand it. But I do know that I haven't seen any Unity games with decent transparency. Oh, it's a shame. Go ahead and check some stuff on the other screen while this is in my head. Nothing. All right, cool. So we have some light there now. What we're going to do next is switch over some of the lighting that we were using. If we look over here, these glow as well. If we move the player over to them, these are supposed to be spotlights that produce a glow in the actual, like, in the world. They're supposed to refract off the water, and you're supposed to really get a glow. So let's take a look at how that looks right now with the transparency shader. We should probably just go ahead and fix the pointer, because the pointer is the #1 most noticeable thing. But you can see that, how it's visible slightly against that rock there, but it's not visible at all against the fog. And that's because I believe it's actually using the fog shader, which is kind of pointless. So I'm thinking about switching that out for an opaque shader as well. Basically, the way that works is the closer you get to these, the less they shine. And that means that they should be visible from far away. But as you get closer, all you see are these particles, these glowing particles, which are basically invisible when you get far away, just because they're so small. So the idea is that when you're far away, you'll see that. And as you get closer, you'll see glowing particles. And I guess that works okay-ish, but because it uses the same shader as the fog system, you can't actually see it if there's fog involved, which is the opposite of what I want. I want it to show up extra clearly against the fog. So maybe I'll work with that later. For now, let's think about how to fix up this beam that we've got. Right now, we are using a material that is ridiculously specialized. If we were to select that, I believe it's inside of the mission. It's this hollow indicator. And the way it works, you can't tell because it uses an override that doesn't show up in the inspector, but it radically offsets the tiling so that the tiling will give us a different effect. And then we've got clipping turned on. So when it's this really, really bright, shining beacon, what that is it's very, very tightly tiled. Where is it? Oh, there it is. So when the tiling goes up, oh, is it not X? It must be Y. No? What's going on here? Well, I can't do it manually for some reason. There must be something wrong with it. But either way, we're going to need another hollow indicator system that works a little bit better. If we take a look at the HUD guide mesh filter, it's within one of these old files that sucks. This one to be exact. So actually editing it in here is a pain in the ass, but we can actually, at least look at it. And this is what it looks like. And you can see how it's got a very, very unusual UV map. The top here is at the top, in the middle, on the left that is. So if we take a look, see? So what happens is basically we concentrate on each of these axes and we scale the ball of light in this direction as we need it. The only issue is that I think I was scaling it like straight up like this, and what we actually want to do is scale it maybe 100% vertically or 100% horizontally. I don't believe there's a reason for us to scale it in this loop. I think that was just me being lazy. So let's go ahead and duplicate it. Move the other one away in case we need it later. And then we'll just try and fix this so that it is... oh, is it scaling towards the individual origins? It's not working. Can I get this to unwrap with a more aggressive unwrapping? Oh my god, this is a nightmare. Let's go ahead and cut this and put it into the new one. There it is. And then we'll delete it. This one isn't named HUD guide, so it should be fine. So this is the HUD guide. We're going to duplicate this, move it off to the side, and then here, this is our HUD guide right now. Let's go ahead and re-UV wrap it. And you can see that this is what it looks like when it's like super sharp. What we actually want to do is create like a horizontal unwrap. That worked great. Okay, so here you can see this is weird looking, but it's actually very close to what we want. So we'll go ahead and accept it. So, I mean, I guess there's no reason not to scale it up as much as we want here, but the basic idea is that we should try to get at least these elements square, and then the rest, if we were to select this and then switch over to scaling it via, come on, there's no active element? Oh, for fuck's sake. Every other method of doing this has an active element button, but not this one. That would be too easy. That's good enough, you know what? So we're going to go ahead and flip it and then move it into position like this. And if we take a look, that means that we've got this box here on the left, and then as it goes right, it becomes like this. See? Very simple. So now we can simply scale it down on the x-axis and just have this part glow. However, we are going to want to make it fill the whole width. You know what? I screwed that up because it's only half of the element. God damn it. All right. Try again. There we are. Much better. So obviously we do have to scale that down quite a bit. And now I understand what follow active quads does. Hooray! Awesome. That's super useful, actually. I actually can't see the chat window when I'm doing stuff today, but it doesn't appear to matter much, so that's fine. Why are you HUD Guide 001? Did I forget to save? Save. There we are. So this is now a HUD guide that has a completely different UV map, and we're going to have to change basically everything about how our UV map works. If we look at how the guide element functions in 15 or 20 minutes, we will be able to see it. Well, apparently JetBrains Writer makes my computer go berserk because it's just turned on all of its fans in a desperate attempt to open up this text program. All right, so here's the guide element. And basically what we're doing with the guide element is we've got this range curve and this precision curve. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is assign values to our color, our setup here. And what we do is we set the tint and the scale according to a variety of colors and precisions and stuff. And that's basically what we're going to continue doing, but we're going to have to radically change how it works. So let's go ahead and create ourselves a new material for it. I guess this is technically holographic, so we'll put it in here. And we will call it HUD Guide. What? Oh, it did open. Yeah, well, too late now. All right, here it is. So it's going to be a surface shader that is unlit, like this. We're going to go ahead and bring on that transparency. Cut out. And then we're going to want to put in an alpha test. So opaque alpha test. There we are. That's what we want. The emission is going to be tint. So let's go ahead and make a color. Call it tint. And the question is, see, it's called underscore capital tint. So we are going to have to change a lot of the values, even if we try and map it. We'll have to think about exactly what we want. But basically, we're going to have to rewrite it. We're going to have to completely rewrite it. So we want this emission, but here's the thing. We actually want to multiply that emission by our alpha value. Our alpha value is going to be quite different than you might expect. So let's go ahead and create a property, which we will call focus. And focus is going to be between 0 and 1. And basically what we're going to want to do is the lower our focus value is, the more of the variables we chop off, the more of the UV map we chop off. Not 100% sure. It's kind of backwards when it's like this, but we can always remap it. So let's go ahead and see how it looks like this, and then we'll remap it later. We're going to put in the UV map, and we're going to be using the U coordinate. We're going to be doing a step. We'll try the step anti-aliasing, see if that works. And we'll drop the focus in, and if B is greater than focus, then we'll want to get that 0 out of it. So we'll just do a multiply up here. We will multiply this, and we will also bring it in to here. So when we set that up, this HUD guide Oh, it's using the wrong thing. So we're going to switch this out from hollow indicator to our new HUD guide. Boom. And you can see that it's completely opaque. And as we change the focus, it goes the wrong direction. Oh, no. Not a big deal. Just waiting for the sirens to go away so that they stop distracting me. So basically, all we need to do is do a 1 minus or flip them around. So you can see that this is the only problem remaining. When we get down to 0, it actually cuts off literally everything. So what we need to do is we actually need to make it have a minimum. And I think the easiest way to do that is to just do a remap. We could actually like say that the minimum is 0.1 or whatever, but it makes more sense for us to try and do this in a way that that is not going to be reliant on me remembering a magic number. It's hard enough having to remember that it's actually backwards. Maybe we'll rename this from focus to fuzziness. There we are. So now that it's fuzziness 0, you can see that that gives us a fairly dedicated element. We're going to remap that to 0.05, make it a little bit tighter. There we are. And now whenever it gets fuzzy, like that. So the only issue here is that what we actually need to do is those edges need to be softened and dithered rather dramatically. So in order to do that, rather than the step anti-aliasing, we just need to do a subtract. The only problem is I don't actually know which direction to subtract. We'll figure it out in a second here. So we'll try subtracting this one, and then we'll try subtracting it the other way. There's no dithering right now, so it should still be very, very sharp. Oh, it's black. I'm pretty sure it's just backwards, but black sure is interesting. Let's go ahead and add in a dither operator. And we will switch them. Okay, so that's definitely backwards. You see that? But I'm not sure why it's black. It shouldn't be black. That's very weird. Let's go ahead and move the HUD guide a little bit because at the moment it's kind of hard to see. So sorry, I'm trying to get this to work and it's not behaving terribly well. So this is correct. Why is it black? Oh, I'm multiplying it by 0. That's why it's black. That's better. All right, so let's go ahead and change it back to blue. There we are. If we change the fuzziness, you can see how it becomes more focused, but it does not exactly become clearer. What we want to have happen is the more fuzzy it is, the weaker we want these values to be. And the less fuzzy it is, the stronger we want them to be. So when we're actually doing that subtract, we need to take into account how fuzzy it is and multiply it by 1 minus the fuzziness, or even much, much more aggressive than that. So the fuzziness needs to be... So the first thing we do is we find the texture coordinate and whether the texture coordinate is within range. That gives us a value that will drop towards 0. But it will never be very high. So we need to do a remap where we take that and we say that the min old value is going to be 0 and the max old value is going to be the fuzziness. Whereas the min new and max new are 0 and 1. In theory, that should fix it. It's good to know what I'm doing. Only problem is we don't actually want it to always be between 0 and 1. We want it to be between 0 and 1 if the fuzziness is 0. And we want it to be between, very much a weaker number if it's between, if it's that. So max new needs to be basically 1 minus fuzziness, more or less. Let's try it out. We'll probably end up using a remap instead, but we'll just pop that in. So, oh, that's actually perfect. I don't know about perfect, but that's actually pretty good. All right. We'll leave it like that for now. The mask clip value shouldn't matter at all. I don't know why it was set to that random number, but that's fine. So that's our HUD guide, but our HUD guide currently isn't set up right in the coding. Our coding for it is wrong. So we're going to pop up our code for it, and we're going to take a look here. When we're updating this, what we're trying to do is figuring out our precision. If we take a look at the precision here, it's range curve evaluate range percent times lock-in. Lock-in is a value that is provided somewhere. This is a lot of mumbo jumbo that I put together for no reason. I was trying to do something and it worked fine for 6 months, but we're replacing it now, and I don't think we want it to be like this. The concept of lock-in, I think, is pointless because it should just be a function of range. Yeah, let's go ahead and delete lock-in. So when we get the range curve evaluate, if we take a look at the range curve, you can see that it goes from 0 to 1 in a linear fashion in the code. It's also that way in here. It's from 0 to 1 in a linear fashion. So we can change that to be whatever we want, but that's a very basic setup, which means that when we're looking at our setup here, precision is simply going to be between 0 and 1 based on how close it is. So the closer it is, the less our precision, which is the point. When you get close, your guide goes to fuzz because it doesn't know exactly where you want to be. So that should be fine. Yeah, that should be fine. And then what we've got is a color. Where are we setting the colors up? I don't think we need to worry about the colors. I guess the point of the color is that as it locks in, it changes colors a little bit. I guess we'll leave that in. The idea here is that previous color never gets updated. No, it does. But that just means that the previous color is going to sweep towards whatever the target color is all the time, and the target color is defined as a specific object, so there's no point to that. Let's go ahead and change that. We don't want it to be like that. We're going to go ahead and have two colors, which we'll call focus color and fuzz color. And we'll just loop between them based on what we need. So down here in our color setup, we're just going to say, oh, I see. It sets the alpha differently. That's not what we're using anymore. We don't care about that. So we're going to go ahead and say color C equals color.lerp fuzz color. Oh, it's actually backwards, isn't it? No, it's a fuzz color to, was it precise color? Focus color. And we'll just use a precision. And that might be backwards, but whatever. So we set the color equal to C. And that's underscore tint, which is perfectly fine. And then what we're going to do here is we set this differently than we did before. It's no longer that. It's going to be mpb.setFloat. The name is going to be fuzziness. And it's going to be precision curve. Stop that. What the fuck happened? Don't. Wow, that was fucking weird. Here we are. And that should do. When we look at this, our fuzzy curve goes from 1 to 20, which is obviously nonsense. So we're going to make it from 1 to 1 also. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to 1 minus it. The more precise we are, the less fuzzy we are. Pretty basic, right? But I'm not 100% sure that's correct. I might have gotten something backwards. Also, for some reason, it looks like mission broke. Oh, because I changed the lock-in. That's fine. So just let that grind for a second. All right, so our HUD guide. Whoosh, whoosh, that should work. Let's find out. See how it looks. All right, well. Unless I missed my guess, it didn't work at all. It appears to be... Oh. All right, so I think the problem there is simply that I moved this and it kept the offset. That's better. So here you can see that it is pointing very aggressively, but it is completely opaque. Just flushed blue, which is something that happens when the shader errors out, is slowly turning yellow, which means it's becoming fuzzier. So the fuzziness is correct, but for some reason... oh. Okay, so it was beyond the permissible bounds, I think. So it should look like this the whole time, but instead it did that. See that? So my guess is that one of these values is going nuts, and we're going to go ahead and fix that. So my guess is that when this percentage is 1, it does something stupid or something. So what we're going to do is we're just going to have it spit out. That's the mission. There it is. We're just going to have it spit out. Oh, precision curve. I forgot. It had a previous value that was set to 20. So it was like telling us that we needed a fuzziness of 20, which was the problem. So that should be better. There we go. So here you can see that it's using the focus color. And then as we get closer, it'll turn yellow and dissipate, which is obviously yellow is not what we're going to end up using. It's not an error. So what we're going to do is we might go from blue to green. That might be a good idea. There we go. So I'll be the first to say that I don't really like how that dither looks. All right. We need to fix the dither. It's really, really crappy. Coptisbong says hello. Coptisbong says haha. Hello. How you doing? So let's see if we can make it a little crappy, less crappy by using a texture. So if I bring this over, I can pop in a texture like this. And what we'll do is we won't need that multiply, but we will need this multiply. And we'll put the texture sample and the tint together like this. And we're going to want to use the alpha here as an added multiple down here on the dither. So there we go. So that texture sample is going to be pretty easy because we've already got some holographic texture samples. Let's just take a look and see whether or not any of them seem pretty. So this is obviously the exact visual that I want to avoid. So if we just drop a different texture sample in there, we've got a couple. Let's try CircPart02. Choop. And you can see that we've got some values here that are a little bit more interesting. Coptus Bong says that he likes watching the stream. Thank you very much. I do it to keep myself focused, but if other people benefit, that's always nice. So you can see that now what we've got is some multicolored pointing stuff. There are a lot of, the way that the holographic system works is that it separates RGB channels and then treats each of them as just plain old gray, or plain old tint. So what we're probably going to do is take those RGBs and separate them. The question is whether or not I want to, you can see how that's not really working, is it? As the dither value gets really close to 0, it looks really terrible. So the basic options I have are how I want to get rid of the dither when it's very, very close to 0. This part looks okay when it kind of spreads out in that weird glittery edge. I kind of like how that looks, but I'll need to make it better. It's not quite good enough. But then this part, where it just kind of turns into pixel noise, I don't want that. Or if I do want that, I want it to be way, way more interesting. So let's go over into our indicator guide. Here it is. And let's just radically shrink this inner circle. That might be too much. Well, it's definitely more noticeable now. I think I need the dither to be a little bit less friendly. I need the dither to stop doing what it's doing when it's down near like 0.1. So first off, let's change these tiling values. They're a little bit, that one was fine. This one's the one that doesn't work right. And then what we're going to want to do is over here, this value coming out of the multiply, we're going to want to shunt it so that if it's below 0.1, it's a 0. And if it's above 0.1, it's not. And I'm not really sure how to do that, but I think that I can just use an if. So the way that the if statement works is it's risky to use an if statement because there are certain situations where it's super slow. But I don't really know how to click on the online reference. It's super weird that they made it so that the online reference pop-up goes away when you try and move your mouse onto it. So the if statement compares two inputs, A and B, and outputs a value. So it outputs these values. So if I were to take B, well, that's weird. If I were to take B and make it 0.05, and then put an A, there you go. And if A is greater than B, then that, otherwise a 0, a big fat 0. And I think that these are going to be zeros without me entering in any values. The only issue I've got is that the if statement might be slow. I'm not 100% sure on that. Oh, that's my trash. Something was making clicking noises. It's my trash can. So let's see whether or not this is the right basic shape. Oh, what a wonderful little flash it puts in there. And then it should start to fade out. Pop. Perfect. Not great, but better. Because the other option we've got is that we could use... The problem is that even if it's black, it's going to be black and opaque. So it's one of those situations where I'm not sure there is a good answer, but we're going to go ahead and pump up some of these values here. And then what we're going to want to do is take the red, green, and blue channels and max them instead of just multiplying like this. So max. Max again. And then multiply. Here, there. And the reason we have to do this is because we need to take the red, green, blue and bring them into the fold. I guess we don't need this multiply. So we'll just do red, green, blue, because for some reason they don't have an n argument max. And then we'll just drop that into here. And that should allow us to get one color instead of 3 colors. Like that. See? So now when we hit play, we should no longer have the kind of strangely multicolored setup. It should now be a single hoop like that. And it still should have the same sort of behavior aside from that. There. Yeah, more or less. Let's try some other details. So we're currently using this. We'll use this instead. So the difference is that this one is much, 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 much thinner, more threadbare. And you can see right away it gets really, really spidery. It's just too thin to be useful, but we can pump it up by changing the tiling on the Y plane. So if we take this tiling and reduce it, the lines become thicker. Still too spidery, though. I wouldn't mind it if I could make it less spidery, but unfortunately for me, you know what I can do? Of course, I could create a different... That sounds fine. Hold on a second. I'm going to turn on the art program, and we're going to create a custom hologram for this particular setup. Come on. Pop that open. Save it as CircPart 03. Bring everybody back. Welcome back. So basically what we're doing is we're drawing red, green, and blue channels. We're going to just paint the background flat white just so that we can keep track of what's going on. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make red, green, and blue channels that have different opacities. That way what'll happen is we'll have some of the other channels come in when the opacities are high, and then they'll go away when the opacities get low. That's the idea. So to do that, we're going to need to come up with red, green, and blue that we like. This tip here is the tip of the indicator is this. It's over here, right here. And what that means is that it's this right here. And what that means is that anything that is down there is going to get shaped around the point. So even though it's flat, it's going to end up looking like a point. And that means that we actually want to fill quite a bit. With that in mind, let's go ahead and make this mostly vanish so that we don't get too distracted. Turn this to additive. Boom. And then we're going to just use box select to make nice clean selections. So we're going to want to start with something like this, I think, just like before. Make it nice and thick. And then we're going to want to make it just completely red. Shoop. That's not working. Oh, it is. Oh, I'm adding it to a white surface because I'm brilliant. So let's go ahead and repaint this as a black surface. There we go. We'll make this additive as well. So with that big red bar, the idea is that you want it to be a little bit more interesting here and there. So we're going to go ahead and make it interesting the same way we did over here by simply moving a chunk of it and then connecting it up. Oh, that didn't work. There we are. In order to connect it up, we're going to need to select a certain width of particle here. We're going to go ahead and create a new layer for it. Well, that's not going to do any jobs. There we are. There we go. And then we'll duplicate that layer. Oh, come on. Like this. Move this over because we know it's the right width. And then we'll drop those all down. There we go. And then over here, what we've got are these dots. So we can cut. I want it to feel a little bit organic, but not too organic. Now previously what we had were dots. I don't think dots are going to work for this. We're just going to go ahead and split the middle apart like this. Or maybe it would be better if we just dragged it. So I think that that'll actually not be too shabby. And then what we'll do is we'll duplicate this, lock it, and paint in green. And you can see that it doesn't look green, it looks yellow. That's because we're additive at the moment. But basically what we're going to want to do is offset the green in such a way that it feels cool when we have both of them. So I think what we'll do is we'll put it up at the top and then flip it. Not that way. Come on, stop being annoying. Actually, that's not too shabby of an idea right there. The only problem I've got is that these vertical beams are going to be really obvious, but we'll go ahead and try it, and if it doesn't work, it's okay. So the last thing we're going to want is the blue. And so for the blue, we're going to go ahead and flip it vertically and horizontally. And then we'll allow the blue to kind of fill in the base here. There we are. Perfect. So with that in mind, what we can do is hide the black, hide this, and then we can change the opacity of these so that they will pop in when we want them to. So we'll set one at like 34, and we'll set one at like 66. And then we'll save that. And if we use that, There's still some more polishing to do. It's not going to magically work. But if we use that instead of what we were using before, we're going to want to mark that as point filtered, and alpha is transparency. There we go. Let's take a look. So the idea here is that we're going to change how the opacity works, and instead of being a fall off like that, we're going to do something a little bit more interesting and aggressive. One of the things we're going to do first, though, is we're going to change the values because they are set up for what we were doing before, which isn't at all what we're doing now. There we go. That's a little better. So with it set up like this, you can see that there is some difference in the transparency of these objects. And what we're going to do, okay, it looks like that one is off the edge. That'll do. What we're going to do is, instead of using just the raw transparency, we're going to remap the transparency. That will allow us to drop the low transparency stuff off without losing all of the transparency. And that's really important when we're using a dithering effect, because we don't want to dither everything. It looks really weird. So we're going to go ahead and dither away just one of the lines at a time. So basically what we're going to do here is this max is going to get remapped. Actually, that's not the part that matters. It's this one down here, this alpha. This is going to get remapped based on the fuzziness. So the same thing we're doing down here, basically. No, that's register. My bad. Remap. So right now, the remapping, it's between 0 and 1, which is correct. And what we would like it to be is between a negative value and 1, where we drop the 0.3s and the 0.4s and all that stuff down. But we actually don't want it we don't want it to be between a negative value and 1, because we want to push all the values up. So basically, we should be subtracting, and then we should be radically amping it up, and then we should be clamping. So rather than remapping, let's do it a little bit more aggressively with a subtract. So we get this alpha value here, and then the more fuzzy it is, the less we can see, right? Yeah, that should be correct. So we're going to drop that in as a subtract. That will get us a value that is an arbitrary setup. We're going to then multiply it by something arbitrary I haven't decided yet, maybe 5. Then we're going to do a clamp 0, 1. And then we're going to drop that into the multiply. There are other things we could do. Instead of clamping 0, 1, we could do a step. That would do it. Let's find out. There are lots of options, and we're going to want to take a look and see which ones don't suck or suck less. So this is our HUD. I can't see it. There it is. This yellow ball is in the way. So we're just going to move it for a second here. We'll bring it back down when we're done. So this is what it looks like. And you can see that now each of the lines is substantially more distinct. So when we have it, all 3 of them, right? And then as it fades, these lines fade in a different order, like that. See? That's pretty close to how I want it. Let's see how it looks in function, in operation. That blue might not be in the right spot. It might be too much. I really don't like that blue flash, and I don't know what it is. All right, so I think I need to multiply it by more than 5. Let's go ahead and multiply it by 10. Actually, let's just go ahead and not multiply it. Let's just do a step. So basically, if the step is above 0, we want it to be 1, and if it's below 0, we want it to be 0. But I'm a little bit worried it's going to be like really aggressive. Let's find out. Oh, look at that. Whew. That's not what I expected. Pump. Pump. Yeah, it's too aggressive. So we're going to go back and do it the other way, which is just multiplying it. And we'll just multiply it by a very big number, like say 10. It's still giving us this opacity where there shouldn't be any opacity. See that pop there? I don't want that. It's too high. Okay, let's bring it back down to 5. I don't know where this is coming from because we're clamping 0 to 1. Oh, okay. So the problem there is that when our alpha is 0 and we're at a fuzziness of 1, then we end up with a negative 1. We should multiply by 5? No, it should still be a negative value. I'm not sure. Okay, so that's still a really sharp, sudden fall off. Well, let's keep adjusting this until it's something that we can deal with. I think that the problem that we're having right now is that the texture that we're using, when the alpha is 0, but the fuzziness is maxed out, or minned out. Is the fuzziness negative 1? Is that what I'm seeing here? It really twitches, doesn't it? Let's go ahead and see what our fuzziness values are. It should be 1 minus the precision curve, and the precision curve should always be between 0 and 1, and it is. So I'm not sure where it's getting this value, where it's overriding an alpha of 0. No, this isn't quite how I want it anymore. I screwed it up. I screwed it up somewhere. I don't know where. So let's go ahead and just do it direct again. It's kind of like the easiest way to do it, and we're going to see whether or not where the screw up is. So that works. And then as I move, is it going to fade away nicely, or is it going to just be a little bit too sharp? So you can see how that's a little bit too vague. It's a little too fuzzy for my taste. I want them to fade out a little bit more than that. Which is why I was subtracting. So the clamping between 0 and 1 should work. Let's delete the multiply and just leave it with a clamp. So now we're subtracting the fuzziness. So the fuzzier it is, the lower our opacity is. But we're doing that in 2 places. So No, we're rebalancing it, so I think this is gonna work. The multiplying was causing bugs. I'm not sure how. Maybe it was... I pressed undo, and this is notoriously bad at undoing, so maybe that was it. This is not too shabby. It's more or less how I want it to be. Maybe I'll leave it like this for now, and I can always figure out a different look for it later. Now the only problem I've got is I think it's a little bit big. So let's go ahead and shrink it. Now, do I want that to be super bright blue? I sort of think I don't. I think I kind of want it to be much fainter. Because I don't want the player to feel like they absolutely have to follow it. Let's go ahead and take it from a bright blue down into like a dark blue. Yeah, that's much less aggressive. I can't say I'm super happy with it, but it's better than it was, and it'll no longer cause weird glitches, which is the priority. So I'm basically going to stop now. If you have any questions, I'll pay attention for a little bit longer. Ask them now if you want. And I'm going to go ahead and close these down. All right. Should I take a... I think I probably should take a GIF, but it's really unimpressive. I mean, it's like, oh, look, the arrow is now slightly different. And sometimes it glitches out and flashes for reasons I don't understand. If you do know why it sometimes glitches out and flashes, tell me, because I want to fix it. Maybe it's like a timing thing, and it's like updating at just the wrong moment, and a value is coming in as errored or something. Well, whatever it is, it'll still be there next week, and you can tell me then. See you on Wednesday or next Saturday, whichever you prefer.